He thought his most scandalous secret would never see the light of day until Howard Stern aired the damning affair footage live on national television. The shocking clip sent shock waves across the globe. The internet went into meltdown and Trump completely lost it in front of millions. Where are you watching from? Comment below and let's begin. It was just after 8 p.m. on a Thursday night. The kind of night where most people expected Howard Stern's show to be the usual mix of crude humor, celebrity gossip, and the occasional unpredictable prank. But from the moment the first red on-air light flickered in the dim studio, there was an electricity in the air that seasoned listeners could feel without seeing. The lighting was lower than usual, shadows stretching across Stern's desk. His producers sat unusually still behind the glass, their eyes darting between monitors, whispering to each other like they were guarding a live bomb. And then there was Howard leaning into the microphone with that infamous sly smirk. His voice already carrying the weight of something different. He didn't start with music. Didn't greet the audience with a casual, "Hey now." Instead, his voice cracked with a dry sarcasm as he said, "Well, folks, I think I'm about to lose a few friends tonight, but what the hell? Let's make history." The studio was dead silent, except for the faint hum of equipment. Stan tapped a pen against the desk, drawing out the tension. "For years," he began, "you've heard me talk about the people who come in here and spill more than they should. Politicians, actors, musicians, hell, even the president. They come in, they think it's all laughs, and they forget the mic's still on." He paused, leaning closer to the mic. "But tonight, I've got something no one has ever seen before. Not the media, not the tabloids, not even Milan." A low chuckle followed, but his eyes didn't match the humor. This was calculated. This was deliberate. The camera feed for the show's video stream cut to a close-up of Stern's face, every wrinkle etched deeper by the shadows. "What I'm about to play," he said slowly, "is exclusive footage involving Donald J. Trump, and let's just say, a mystery woman. And before you ask, yes, it's real. And no, it's not from some tabloid junk. This is the kind of thing you only get when people forget there's always someone watching." In the control room, a producer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Even by Stern standards, this was dangerous territory. He reached for a small remote on his desk and tapped it. A large monitor behind him flickered to life, static crawling across the screen before settling into a grainy, almost dreamlike image. The quality wasn't perfect, like something recorded on an older security camera, but it didn't need to be. The very first frame was enough to make anyone's heart skip. There, in the center of the shot, was Donald Trump. Not on a stage, not in a boardroom, not shaking hands with supporters. No, this was Trump in a dimly lit penthouse. His iconic frame unmistakable even in the fuzzy resolution. He was seated on a plush white sofa, leaning far too close to a woman whose face was partially obscured by her long hair. The clip lasted no more than 8 seconds, but it was electric. Trump's hand brushed hers. They leaned in close, speaking in low voices that couldn't quite be heard. And in the background, the decor was unmistakable to anyone who had ever seen photos of Trump's personal properties. Gold-trimmed walls, marble flooring, and the kind of ornate furniture that screamed opulence. When the clip cut to black, the room didn't immediately react. It was as if everyone, both in the studio and listening at home, had been holding their breath without realizing it. Then came the first gasp. Robin Quivers, Stern's longtime co-host, broke the silence with a sharp intake of air. "Howard," she said, her voice half laughing, half shocked. Stern tilted his head toward her, feigning innocence. "What? You've never seen a man sitting with a friend in his very expensive living room?" The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife, but behind the glass, his producers weren't laughing. They were watching the live chat on Stern's streaming platform erupt into chaos. Comments were flying by so fast they blurred into a wall of text. "Is that real? That's Trump. OMG. Clip it." On Twitter, hashtags began forming within minutes. Hashtag Stone Trump tapes, hashtag Trump affair, hashtag Goldroom secrets. People were screen recording the stream, cutting the clip into GIFs, and tagging every major news outlet they could think of. In the studio, Stern leaned back in his chair, the picture of Cam, while the world outside started to catch fire. "Relax," he said almost mockingly. "That was just a teaser. We'll get to the good stuff in a bit, He shuffled some papers as if the next commercial break might be about breakfast cereal and not the political scandal of the decade. The effect was maddening for listeners, like dangling the answer to a national mystery just out of reach. Newsrooms across the country scrambled. Producers at CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News started cutting into their evening programming. "We're getting reports that Howard Stern has aired what appears to be some kind of compromising footage involving former President Donald Trump," one anchor said live on air, his tone wavering between disbelief and urgency. On the internet, journalists were frantically trying to verify the clip's authenticity, but the conversation was already running away from them. The people had decided it looked real enough to be dangerous. Meanwhile, back in Stern's studio, the atmosphere was electric. Robin tried to get details out of him. "Howard, where did that come from?" she asked. Leaning into her mic, Stern gave her a look that was equal parts mischief and warning. "Robin, you know I can't reveal my sources, but let's just say when you've been in this business as long as I have, people give you things. People trust you, especially when they want to get even." A producer slid a small piece of paper onto Stern's desk, a note that read simply, "Trending #1 in the U.S." Stern grinned like a man who had just won a bet. "Well, well," he said into the mic, "looks like we've got everyone's attention." Then, in a move that felt almost cruel, Stern announced a commercial break. The control room immediately cut to ads, but the live chat exploded in frustration. People weren't going anywhere. They were glued to their screens, desperate to know what else was coming. On Twitter, major political commentators began weighing in, each trying to outdo the others with hot takes. Some claimed it was a deep fake. Others said they'd heard rumors about the penthouse meetings for years. Conspiracy theorists had a field day, weaving elaborate backstories about who the woman might be. When the feed returned, Stern's tone shifted slightly, less playful, more deliberate. "Listen," he said, "I'm not saying what you just saw proves anything. I'm not saying it doesn't. But I am saying this. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, and sometimes it hides in gold-trimmed penis." Robin laughed nervously. The tension was thick enough to make even seasoned radio veterans squirm. As the segment wound down, Stan leaned in close to his mic, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "That was just the first tape," he said, letting the words hang in the air like the final note of a symphony. "We've got more. Oh, we've got a lot more." The audience didn't just hear it, they felt it. The promise of more footage wasn't just a tease. It was a fuse being lit with the explosion waiting somewhere down the line. And as Stan pushed his chair back, shuffling his notes for the next segment, one thing was already certain. The world wouldn't be talking about anything else tomorrow morning. Long before politics turned Donald Trump into one of the most polarizing figures on the planet, he was a celebrity businessman who thrived on being the center of attention. And in the late 1990s through the mid-2000s, there was one stage he loved more than almost any other, The Howard Stern Show. Back then, Stern's radio program wasn't just another talk show. It was the talk show unpredictable, boundary-pushing, and notorious for pulling the most unfiltered confessions out of its guests. Politicians, rock stars, adult film stars, movie icons, they all came in knowing they might say something that would follow them forever. For Trump, that wasn't a bug. It was a feature. He seemed to believe that no matter what came out of his mouth, as long as people were talking about him, he was winning. Stern had a way of making guests forget there were millions listening. He'd start with light banter, maybe a joke about their clothes or hair, then ease into seemingly harmless questions until suddenly they were knee-deep in territory they'd never touch in a CNN interview. He was the king of the pivot. 1 second talking about real estate, the next asking about a guest's sex life, childhood insecurities, or private grudges. Trump thrived in that chaos. He played along, laughing loudly, tossing out remarks that even in those days made headlines. And Stern knew exactly how far to push him. Not too much to make him storm out, but just enough to make him reveal something raw. Over the years, Trump said things on Stern's show that most public figures would consider career-ending. There were the infamous remarks about dating younger women, not just casually, but with the kind of calculated age math that left listeners stunned. He mused openly about how 30 is a perfect age for a woman, and anything beyond that was too much life experience. Stern would laugh, feeding him questions that made the comments even more provocative. Then came the deeply unsettling jokes about Ivanka, delivered in the same breath as compliments about her looks. Stern never had to push hard on that topic. Trump volunteered far more than a father should. The audience laughed nervously, unsure where the line between shock humor and reality blurred. There were also the conversations about Milan. At the time, she was still the glamorous, mysterious Slovenian model who had stepped into Trump's world of gold-plated skyscrapers. Trump would bring her up on air, but not in the way most men would talk about a wife. Stern would tease him about whether she was the one, and Trump would smirk, dodging the question with jokes about prenups, the importance of keeping things fresh, and how he never understood the point of getting married unless you're upgrading. Stern's jabs about their perfect marriage were often thinly veiled barbs, suggesting that maybe it was more business deal than love story. Trump would laugh them off, insisting they were in love, but there was always something in his tone, something that didn't quite sell the fairy tale. What made their dynamic so fascinating was the mutual trust, or at least the illusion of it. Trump seemed to believe Stern was on his side, a friendly provocator who would never truly burn him. Steyn, on the other hand, played the long game. He understood that when powerful people talk long enough, they eventually say the thing they shouldn't. And Trump, with his ego and love of the spotlight, was the kind of guest who'd return again and again, never realizing that each visit left behind a breadcrumb for the future. Between the live shows, the off-air banter, and the moments when the mics were accidentally still recording, Stern's archives grew massive. Decades of audio, footage from in-studio cameras, and private after-show chats. Some of it was harmless. Trump boasting about golf scores, talking about beauty pageants, making digs at rivals. But some of it was the kind of material that could sink reputations, shatter public images, and ignite political firestorms. Stern kept it all, not because he had an immediate plan to use it, but because Howard Stern understood something fundamental. Timing is everything. The public only ever saw a fraction of those conversations. The edgier, more controversial moments that aired back then were already enough to dominate headlines. But tucked away in those archives was the other kind of content. The kind too hot to air in its own time. Either because it was legally risky or because even Stern knew it would set off explosions he wasn't ready to deal with. The Howard Stern Show had always been outrageous, but there were lines that once crossed could end more than just careers. They could end relationships, alliances, even entire business empires. Still, Stan hinted at it over the years. A throwaway comment here, a sarcastic remark there, small reminders that he knew more than he let on. During one particularly infamous interview, Trump bragged about being careful in certain penthouses because you never know who's got a camera. Stan chuckled and said, "Oh, I know, Don. I know." Listeners laughed, but looking back now, it feels less like a joke and more like a warning. By the time Trump was in the White House, his visits to Stern's studio had long stopped, but the history between them lingered. Reporters would ask Stern about the president, and he'd give answers that were just vague enough to avoid legal trouble, but sharp enough to draw blood. "I know him," Stern would say. "I know the real guy. I know things you don't." The press treated it as another celebrity feud, but those who had followed their interactions for years suspected it was deeper than that. Stan didn't just know embarrassing stories. He had receipts. The truth was Stern had been sitting on a mountain of raw, unaired material for decades. Conversations Trump assumed were forgotten. Video clips that had never been broadcast. Background chatter from before and after the mics were supposed to be off. If you piece them together, you could map out an entirely different version of Donald Trump. One stripped of the carefully curated image he projected to voters, business partners, and the media. Stern, ever the strategist, seemed to be waiting for the exact right moment to play his hand. And then, in that dimly lit studio years later, when he looked into the camera and told his audience he had something the world had never seen before, the meaning was clear to anyone who understood their history. This wasn't random. This wasn't spur of the moment. This was the culmination of decades of collecting, cataloging, and above all, waiting. Because Howard Stern knew something Donald Trump never fully understood. In the game of ego, the one who holds the footage holds the power. The studio lights in Howard Stern's booth seemed a little dimmer now, as if even the shadows wanted to lean in closer. Stern had just let that first grainy clip play for the world to see, a fleeting image of Donald Trump in what looked like the gilded interior of his famous Manhattan penthouse. But now, instead of rushing into the next reveal, Stern leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping the desk, letting the suspense breathe. The silence on the airwaves was deafening. The kind of silence that meant millions of people, from New York apartments to suburban living rooms, were frozen in place, waiting for the next word out of his mouth. When Stern finally spoke, his voice took on that slow, teasing tone he'd perfected over decades. Part confession, part dare. You know, he said, this isn't just about some random video. This has a backstory, a long one. And the woman you just saw, well, let's just say she isn't exactly a stranger to certain circles. And just like that, the air crackled with curiosity. For years, whispers had floated around Washington cocktail parties and late-night political strategy rooms about a woman, never named publicly, who had allegedly been involved with Trump during some of his most politically sensitive years. Political reporters called her the Phantom because despite their best efforts, she never appeared in print, never sat for interviews, and never even so much as left a trace on social media that could connect her to him. Yet the whispers persisted. Her name, at least the one Stern now teased, belonged to a woman in her late 30s, strikingly beautiful, with a past rooted in the high-fashion modeling world. Dig a little deeper and you'd find she'd once worked runway shows in Milan, been on the covers of European lifestyle magazines, and was frequently spotted at glittering charity galas in New York. But there was another layer, a darker one, linking her, at least per rumor, to the same exclusive, morally murky social circles that had surrounded Jeffrey Epstein. That was the part that made journalists' hands itch, but also made their editors slam the brakes. The alleged origin of their connection was a black-tie charity gala in 2006, a night when the city's elite gathered at the Plaza Hotel to sip champagne and write oversized checks for causes that conveniently doubled as PR gold. Trump, still the tabloid king of New York, was there with Milan, fresh into their marriage. But insiders would later claim that at some point in the evening, while Milan mingled with a fashion editor from Vogue, Trump found himself in a quiet conversation with this mystery woman near the bar. Witnesses remembered the body language, the leaning in, the shared laugh, the casual brush of his hand against her elbow. From that night onward, the sightings became quieter, more deliberate. She would be seen arriving at Trump Tower through the service entrance late at night, or spotted boarding his private jet under the guise of being a consultant on some vague branding project. In those years before the campaign, the arrangement, if there was one, was invisible to the public. But to those who worked in Trump's orbit, it was an open secret you didn't dare put in writing. By 2015, as Trump's campaign gathered steam, the whispers grew louder. Several investigative journalists began chasing the lead, trying to confirm her identity and the nature of their relationship. One well-respected political reporter from the Washington Post had enough fragments to pitch a front-page expose, details about trips, overlapping hotel bookings, and photographs that allegedly placed them together in discreet getaways in Florida and the Caribbean. But before the piece could go to print, the Pap's legal department pulled the plug. The reason? An avalanche of legal threats from Trump's lawyers combined with a signed non-disclosure agreement from the woman herself, which reportedly included a staggering financial penalty for speaking to the press. That should have been the end of it. In the political world, NDAs are like vault doors. Once locked, they rarely open. But Stern wasn't the political world. He was Howard Stern. Stern, as it turned out, had his own history with the woman. Years ago, she had been a guest on his show, booked not for controversy, but for her modeling work and her charity endeavors. The segment was light-hearted, playful even. But off-air, there had been chatter between Stern's staff and her team about her friendship with Trump. Stern, ever the archivist of scandal, filed it away in the back of his mind. Then, sometime in the late 2000s, Stern and his crew were given what they thought was just another batch of behind-the-scenes footage from a contact in the entertainment industry. The kind of random tape Stern often used for on-air gags. But buried in one of those tapes, mislabeled and forgotten for years, was footage from what appeared to be a private gathering inside Trump's penthouse. The video quality was grainy, like it had been shot on an old handheld camera, or possibly from a hidden recording device. And there she was, the mystery woman, sitting far too close to Trump. The two of them sharing drinks, touching hands, and exchanging smiles that didn't need captions. The footage didn't show anything explicitly sexual, but it didn't have to. The intimacy was unmistakable. Over the years, Stern held on to the tape like a loaded gun he wasn't ready to fire. But when Trump became president and began attacking the media, calling reporters liars, Stern started to hint on air about having things that could ruin him. At the time, listeners thought it was just Howard being Howard, all bluster and no bullet. But tonight proved otherwise. As Stern narrated the woman's backstory live on air, he made it clear that the tape was only the tip of the iceberg. "This isn't the whole thing," Stern said with a smirk, audible, even through the microphone. This is one of several pieces of, let's call it, archived material. And some of it, my friends, has never seen the light of day until now. The effect was instantaneous. Within minutes, social media was ablaze. Twitter hashtags like #TrumpAffair and #SternTapes were trending in multiple countries. Cable news anchors scrambled mid-broadcast to confirm the footage, looping the few seconds Stern had played like it was the Zapru film. On political talk shows, pundits speculated wildly about what else Stern might have and whether the woman would come forward now that her face, albeit partially obscured, was on millions of screens. Meanwhile, in political backrooms, there was panic. Advisors were frantically calling each other, demanding to know how Stern got the footage, whether it could be discredited, and if Trump's legal team could stop the rest from airing. But the most telling reaction wasn't from the strategists or the news anchors. It was from the woman herself. That night, an Instagram account long believed to be hers, though she never publicly confirmed it, suddenly went dark. Every photo, every tagged post, vanished in an instant, and Stern, sitting in his darkened booth, let the world stew in the uncertainty. That, he said slowly, was just a taste. And if you think Donald's mad now, he trailed off, letting the thought hang in the air like a match above a puddle of gasoline. The nation knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next wasn't going to be pretty. For years, people wondered how Howard Stern always seemed to have dirt on the most powerful people in the world. He wasn't a traditional investigative journalist. He didn't have a newsroom full of fact-checkers digging into court records or political scandals. His style was different, more intimate, more disarming. He didn't just interview people. He got inside their heads, made them relax, made them forget the microphones were even there. And that's exactly how Donald Trump had fallen into his trap years earlier. Back in the early 2000s, during one of Trump's many appearances on the Howard Stern Show, there was a moment that didn't make it to air off mic. During a commercial break, Trump had leaned back in his chair and started talking like they were just two guys sharing a private joke. Stern's longtime producer, Gary Debate, later described it as one of those moments where you could feel everyone in the control room go quiet because what he was saying was nuclear. Trump, in his usual boastful tone, claimed he had friends who record everything. Real estate meetings, private dinners, even parties with models and politicians. He said it like it was a badge of honor, a show of dominance. In Trump's mind, having insurance meant no one could cross him without paying for it later. What Trump didn't realize at the time was that this little brag planted a seed in Stern's mind. If tapes existed of other people, then surely there were tapes of him. Stein, always the opportunist, didn't press Trump in the moment. He just let the comment hang in the air, pretending not to care. But behind the scenes, his curiosity kicked into overdrive. Over the next few years, Stan kept hearing little whispers from people in Trump's orbit, producers, event organizers, and former beauty pageant staffers that there were recordings floating around of moments Trump would never want made public. The trail eventually led to a friend of a friend, as Stern later cryptically described it on air. This friend wasn't just some random sauce. He was allegedly tied to Trump's own inner circle, possibly even a disgruntled associate who had once been tasked with safeguarding some of Trump's more compromising insurance files. This person had their own reasons for wanting the tapes out of Trump's hands, and Stern, with his massive platform, was the perfect conduit. But there was a catch. Airing the footage could open Stern up to legal hellfire. Trump wasn't just a public figure. By then, he was a billionaire with a war chest of lawyers who could make someone's life miserable for decades. Inside Stern's production team, the debate was fierce. Robin Quivers, Stern's on-air partner, was immediately skeptical. "If we play this, Howard, they'll sue us into the Stone Age," she warned during a heated meeting. Gary argued that if the tapes were already out there in some form, someone else would eventually leak them, and wouldn't it be better if they were the ones to control the narrative? Stern sat silently through the back and forth, twirling a pen between his fingers, his mind racing. He wasn't scared of Trump. Not really, but he knew the stakes. This wasn't some goofy celebrity blooper. This was potentially carrying, election-shaking material. For years, Stan kept the tapes locked away, both literally and figuratively. Only two other people besides him had seen them, and both had been sworn to secrecy. Whenever Trump came up in conversation, Stan would smirk and drop little breadcrumbs for the audience. "Oh, I've got stories," he'd say. Or, "If Don ever pisses me off, You guys will hear some stuff you won't believe." Most listeners thought it was just typical Stern bluster. They didn't realize he was dead serious. And then came the 2016 election. Stern watched as Trump bulldozed his way through the political landscape, trashing opponents, mocking reporters, and presenting himself as the image of marital loyalty. Stern's fingers itched to reach for those tapes. But he held back. Not yet, he told himself. Trump was too unpredictable, and releasing the footage then might have turned Stern into the story instead of the tapes themselves. He needed the perfect moment. The moment when Trump would be at his most arrogant, most untouchable, so the fall would be that much harder. That moment came years later. After a string of public jabs from Trump aimed at Stern, mocking his ratings and calling him washed up, Stern's patience finally snapped. On the morning of the broadcast, Stern gave a rare live preamble before going to break. He leaned into the mic, his voice lower than usual, and said, "Donald, you should have been nicer to me." He didn't explain. He didn't elaborate, but anyone in the studio could feel the shift in the air. Something was about to happen. Something that had been simmering in the DCK for decades, and Stern was finally ready to turn up the heat. When the show returned from commercials, the entire room went silent. Cameras were rolling, the red on-air light glowed, and Stern's hand hovered over the console. The tapes that had been locked away for years, tapes that some people thought were a myth, were finally going to see the light of day. And somewhere miles away, Donald Trump had no idea that his past was about to walk right into his living room in high definition for the entire world to see. The studio lights dimmed, and for a moment there was only the hum of the microphones and the faint shuffle of Stern adjusting in his chair. The anticipation in the air was electric, almost tangible, like the thick charged silence before a thunderclap. Stern leaned into the mic, voice low, drawing every listener closer without even trying. "All right," he said, a faint smoke playing on his lips. "Let's not waste any more time." Then, with a casual flick of his wrist toward the control booth, the clip began to roll. The screen in the studio and the live-stream broadcast to millions faded in from black to a crisp high-definition shot inside what was unmistakably a luxury hotel suite. The details were sharp. Deep burgundy curtains framing a panoramic night view of a glittering skyline, a half-finished bottle of Dom Perignon resting in an ice bucket, and a scatter of designer clothes across a cream leather sofa. The camera angle wasn't shaky or hidden in the shadows. It was smooth, deliberate, as though someone had staged the shot to look effortlessly candid. And then there he was, Donald Trump, unmistakable even in the dim ambient glow, wearing a white hotel robe loosely tied at the waist. Across from him, reclining on the edge of the bed, was the mystery woman Stern had teased earlier, tall with flowing chestnut hair, her silk slip dress shimmering under the warm light. Their voices were crystal clear, the kind of clarity that made everyone watching feel like they were standing in the room. The woman's laugh was soft, almost conspiratorial as she leaned closer. "We need to be more careful this time," she whispered, her accent faint, but noticeable. "European, perhaps Eastern European." Trump chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "The paparazzi don't matter. They love me. And Milan, she's in New York for the week. She's not going to find out." He said it with the same tone someone might use to order lunch. Casual, confident, utterly unbothered. The moment those words hit the airwaves, Stern slammed the pause button.